7-year-old Grace Patterson stood on her tiptoes to reach the Family Feud microphone, her small frame dwarfed by the bright studio lights and the weight of the questions Steve Harvey had just asked. Her father, Mark Patterson, watched from beside her with eyes that carried 3 months of sleepless nights and the kind of love that grows even fiercer when you know time might be running out. "What's your biggest dream, sweetheart?" Steve had asked gently, sensing immediately that this wasn't an ordinary 7-year-old. That something about Grace's pale complexion and the careful way her father watched her every movement suggested a story deeper than typical game show fare. Grace looked up at Steve with eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. Eyes that had seen more hospital rooms and medical procedures than playgrounds and birthday parties. When she spoke, her voice was clear but soft, carrying the innocent honesty that only children possess when they speak their deepest truths. "I want to be a real princess," Grace said, her small hand moving instinctively to the colorful silk scarf wrapped around her head where her hair used to be. "I want to wear a beautiful dress and go to a real ball, like Cinderella. And I want to dance with a prince." The studio fell completely silent. It wasn't the expectant quiet of an audience waiting for a game show answer. It was the profound silence of 300 adults, recognizing that they had just witnessed something sacred, a child's dream, spoken with the kind of pure hope that exists only when someone hasn't yet learned that some dreams might be impossible. Steve Harvey felt his heart stop for a moment. In 40 years of television, he had encountered every type of contestant imaginable, but there was something about Grace's simple, honest dream that cut through every defense mechanism he had built around his emotions. This wasn't about entertainment anymore. This was about a little girl who might not have many opportunities left to see her dreams come true. Behind Grace, Mark Patterson struggled to maintain his composure. For 3 months, ever since Dr. Sarah Chen at Phoenix Children's Hospital had delivered the diagnosis that had shattered their world, Mark had been trying to be strong for Grace while privately falling apart. Hearing his daughter voice her princess dream on national television brought back every conversation they'd had about fairy tales, every bedtime story about brave princesses, every moment when Grace had twirled around their living room in makeshift gowns created from bed sheets and her mother's old scarves.
"Let me take you back to how we got here."
6 months ago, Grace Patterson had been a typical first grader in Phoenix, Arizona, energetic, curious, and absolutely obsessed with Disney princesses. Her mother, Jennifer, had died in a car accident when Grace was 4, leaving Mark to raise their daughter alone. The first signs that something was wrong had been subtle. Grace had seemed tired and had bruised easily. When blood tests revealed abnormal white blood cell counts, she had been referred to Phoenix Children's Hospital for more extensive testing. "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Chin had said gently, "Grace has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's an aggressive form of blood cancer." The words had hit Mark like a physical blow. His 7-year-old daughter had cancer. "How long?" Mark had asked. The question every parent fears. If the treatment isn't successful, we might be looking at months rather than years. "I'm sorry." 3 months of treatment followed. Grace had endured chemotherapy, lost her hair, and spent more days in hospital rooms than in her own bed. Through it all, she had maintained an optimism that both inspired and broke Mark's heart. "When I'm all better," Grace would say, "can we have a real ball? With dancing and a pretty dress?" Mark always promised that they would, even as doctors delivered updates that made such promises feel like lies he was telling. Both Grace and himself. The Make-A-Wish Foundation had contacted Mark 6 weeks ago, when Grace's treatment responses had plateaued, and Dr. Chen had gently suggested that they might want to start thinking about making memories. The organization specialized in granting wishes for children with life-threatening medical conditions, and they wanted to help Grace experience her princess dream. "We can arrange for her to visit Disney World," the Make-A-Wish coordinator, Mrs. Susan Roberts, had explained. "She can meet all the Disney princesses, have a makeover at the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique, maybe even ride in Cinderella's carriage." But when they had presented the options to Grace, she had surprised everyone. "I want to be a princess somewhere where everyone can see me," she had said. "I want people to know that even sick girls can be princesses too." That's when Mrs. Roberts had suggested Family Feud. The show had featured Make-A-Wish recipients before, and Steve Harvey was known for his genuine warmth with children. If Grace wanted to be a princess in front of a large audience, national television might be exactly the platform she needed. The Family Feud opportunity had seemed like a perfect way to give Grace one of her biggest dreams, while also creating a positive experience during an incredibly difficult time. Mark had applied on Grace's behalf, explaining their situation and Grace's wish to be treated like a real princess. During the drive from Phoenix to Atlanta, Grace had been excited but tired, asking questions about whether Steve Harvey knew any real princesses, whether there might be a castle at the television studio, and whether her princess dress would be fancy enough for such an important place. "Daddy," Grace had said as they checked into their hotel, "do you think Mommy can see me from heaven? Do you think she'll know I'm going to be a princess?" Mark had hugged his daughter close, fighting back tears. "I know Mommy can see you, sweetheart, and I know she's so proud of how brave and beautiful you are." The Family Feud studios had been overwhelming for Grace in the best possible way. The bright lights, the enthusiastic audience, the energy of television production, everything about the environment had felt magical to a little girl who had spent months in sterile hospital rooms. During the family introductions, Grace had presented herself with the poise of someone who had learned to be brave in the face of scary situations. "I'm Grace Patterson," she had said clearly. "I'm 7 years old, and I'm from Phoenix. This is my daddy, Mark, and he takes really good care of me." Steve had approached Grace with special gentleness, understanding immediately that this was a child dealing with something serious. "Grace, you're beautiful, sweetheart. Tell me, what do you like to do for fun?" "I like to pretend I'm a princess," Grace had replied honestly. "And I like to read stories about brave princesses who help people and make the world more beautiful." The audience had responded with warm, supportive applause, and Steve had smiled with genuine affection. "Well, you look like a real princess to me already. Are you ready to play Family Feud?" The game had progressed with Grace participating enthusiastically despite her limited energy. The Patterson family was playing against the Morrison family from Georgia, and both teams had been supportive and encouraging, understanding that this was less about competition and more about creating a magical experience for Grace. During the second round, when Steve asked for things that make people feel special, Grace had buzzed in with being treated like a princess, earning the #1 spot on the board, and a high five from Steve that made her beam with joy. But it was during the fourth round that the moment arrived that would create one of the most magical experiences in Family Feud history. Steve had announced the survey question with his usual energy, not knowing that he was about to ask something that would touch the deepest part of Grace's heart. "Name your biggest dream." The question hung in the studio air, and for a 7-year-old girl who had learned that life could be uncertain and frightening, the answer was simple and pure. Grace had stepped up to the microphone with the confidence of someone who had learned that speaking your truth was important, even when, especially when, that truth was about hope and dreams that might seem impossible. "I want to be a real princess," Grace had said, her voice carrying across the studio with the kind of innocent honesty that only children possess. "I want to wear a beautiful dress and go to a real ball, like Cinderella. And I want to dance with a prince." The studio had fallen completely silent, 300 people recognizing that they had just witnessed something profound. Steve Harvey slowly set down his index cards. In that moment, every instinct he had developed as an entertainer told him to make a joke, to lighten the mood, to keep the energy up. But something deeper, his humanity, his own experience as a father, his understanding that this little girl needed something more important than entertainment, made him choose a different path. "Grace," Steve said gently, "that's a beautiful dream. And you know what? Every little girl deserves to feel like a princess." But what happened next was something that no one in the studio, not Grace, not Mark, not even the producers, had anticipated. While Grace was speaking about her princess dream, Mrs. Susan Roberts from Make-A-Wish Foundation had been backstage, coordinating something unprecedented. She had brought with her a team of stylists, a beautiful princess gown in Grace's size, and a plan to make Grace's dream come true in front of 300 people and millions of television viewers. "Steve," Mrs. Roberts whispered into his earpiece, "we're ready. Can you keep Grace on stage for a few more minutes?" Steve's eyes widened as he understood what was being offered. This wasn't just a game show anymore. This was about to become something magical. "Grace," Steve said, "I need you to stay right there for a moment, okay? Don't move from that spot." Grace nodded, confusion clear on her face, but trusting that Steve had something important to share. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve announced, turning to address the studio audience and cameras. "Sometimes television gives us the privilege of witnessing something that reminds us that magic is real, that dreams can come true, and that every child deserves to experience wonder." He gestured toward the wings of the stage. "Grace, there's someone here who would like to help you with your princess dream. Mrs. Susan Roberts from Make-A-Wish Foundation, would you please come out here?" From backstage emerged a woman carrying what could only be described as a fairy tale come to life, a beautiful princess gown in shimmering blue and silver, complete with matching tiara, glass slippers, and a magical wand that sparkled under the studio lights. Grace's gasp was audible throughout the studio. Her small hands flew to her mouth as she stared at the most beautiful dress she had ever seen in real life. "Grace," Mrs. Roberts said, approaching with tears in her eyes, "every real princess needs a proper gown for her ball. Would you like to try this on?" Grace looked at her father, who was crying openly, then back at the dress. "Is it really for me? Am I really going to be a princess?" "Sweetheart," Steve said, kneeling down to Grace's level, "you already are a princess. This dress is just going to help everyone else see what we already know." What followed was pure magic. With the help of Make-A-Wish stylists, Grace was transformed into a real-life princess right there on the Family Feud stage. When she emerged from behind a decorative screen wearing the gown, tiara, and glass slippers, the studio audience rose to their feet in spontaneous applause. Grace looked like she had stepped out of a fairy tale. Despite the toll that months of treatment had taken on her small body, despite the scarf covering her head where her hair used to be, she glowed with the kind of beauty that comes from pure joy and realized dreams. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve announced, his voice thick with emotion, "I present to you Her Royal Highness, Princess Grace." The applause grew even louder, but Steve wasn't finished with this moment that had transcended entertainment and become something sacred. "Princess Grace," Steve said formally, "every princess deserves a first dance at her ball. Would you honor me with this dance?" Grace nodded eagerly, and Steve extended his hand like a proper prince. As the studio musicians began playing a gentle waltz, Steve Harvey, game show host, comedian, and television personality, became Prince Steve, dancing with a 7-year-old princess in front of an audience that understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Grace laughed with delight as Steve spun her carefully around the stage, her gown twirling perfectly, her tiara catching the studio lights. For those few minutes, she wasn't a little girl fighting cancer. She was Princess Grace, dancing at her royal ball, living her fairy tale dream. "You are the most beautiful princess I've ever seen," Steve whispered to Grace as they danced. "And the bravest." When the dance ended, Steve did something that would become one of the most meaningful moments in television history. He removed his suit jacket, his lucky jacket that he wore to every taping, and placed it around Grace's shoulders, like a royal cape. "Princess Grace," Steve said, his voice carrying across the studio, "this jacket has been with me for every show I've hosted, but today it belongs with real royalty. This is your royal cape, to remind you that you are brave, you are beautiful, and you are loved by everyone in this room and everyone watching at home." Grace pulled the jacket closer around herself, looking like a princess wearing her royal robes. "Thank you, Prince Steve," she said formally, then broke character with a giggle. "This is the best day ever." But the magic wasn't finished. The Morrison family, their competitors, had been so moved by Grace's transformation that they approached the stage and bowed formally to Princess Grace, acknowledging her royal status. Soon, the entire studio audience was bowing to the little girl who had become royalty. Through courage, hope, and the support of people who understood that some moments are more important than games, Mark Patterson watched his daughter's transformation with tears streaming down his face. For months, he had watched Grace endure procedures that would challenge adults, had seen her energy depleted by treatments, had worried about whether she would live to see her 8th birthday. But in this moment, seeing her dance and laugh and glow with happiness, he understood that they had just created a memory, that would last forever, regardless of what the future held. What happened after the cameras stopped rolling became the subject of medical journals, news articles, and discussions about the power of hope and healing. The episode, when it aired with full Make-A-Wish Foundation support, became one of the most watched and shared in Family Feud history. But more importantly, something extraordinary happened in the months that followed. Grace's medical team had expected her condition to continue deteriorating, but instead, her next round of tests showed surprising improvement. Her white blood cell counts had stabilized, and her body was finally responding to treatment in ways that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Dr. Chen was cautious about using the word miracle, but she acknowledged that Grace's improvement was remarkable and unprecedented given her previous prognosis. Sometimes, Dr. Chen told Mark, hope and joy can be powerful medicine. Grace has something to fight for now, something beautiful to hold on to. 6 months after her Family Feud appearance, Grace was declared to be in remission. Her hair was growing back in soft blonde curls, her energy was returning, and her prognosis had changed from months to years, then to a normal childhood life expectancy. Grace kept Steve's jacket through every doctor's appointment, every checkup, every moment when she needed to remember that she was brave and strong and loved. She wore it to her last chemotherapy session, to her first day back at regular school, and to the Make-A-Wish Foundation Gala, where she spoke about the importance of dreams and hope. The episode sparked conversations about childhood cancer awareness, the importance of supporting organizations like Make-A-Wish Foundation, and the power of community to create magic in the lives of children facing impossible challenges. Steve Harvey's foundation established a partnership with Make-A-Wish to grant wishes for children whose dreams involve television appearances, providing opportunities for other young people to experience moments of magic during their most difficult times. The princess gown that Grace wore became part of a traveling exhibit about the power of dreams, visiting children's hospitals across the country to remind other young patients that they too could be royalty, that their courage made them worthy of crowns and recognition. 3 years later, at age 10, Grace was not only cancer-free, but had become a spokesperson for pediatric cancer research and childhood dream fulfillment. She spoke at medical conferences, visited newly diagnosed children, and used her experience to help other families navigate the scary world of childhood cancer with hope and dignity. When I was sick, Grace would tell other children, I learned that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep dreaming and hoping even when things are really hard. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to say your dreams out loud, amazing people will help make them come true. The lesson that 7-year-old Grace taught that day extends far beyond childhood cancer or wish fulfillment. She reminded the world that dreams have power, that hope can be healing, and that sometimes the most important thing adults can do is help children believe in magic, especially when they need that magic most. Steve Harvey learned that day that the most powerful moments in television happen when you're willing to stop being an entertainer and start being a facilitator of dreams. Sometimes a game show host can do more than make people laugh. Sometimes he can help create moments of pure magic that remind everyone watching that beauty and joy are possible, even in the darkest times. Mark Patterson discovered that being a father doesn't mean protecting your child from every difficult truth, but rather helping them find hope and magic even when facing impossible circumstances, and trusting that love and community can create miracles when they're needed most. Because that's what hope looks like, that's what dreams sound like, and that's what happens when a little girl's wish to be a princess meets a world full of people willing to make magic real, proving that sometimes the most important transformations happen not when we escape reality, but when we make reality beautiful enough to sustain us through the hardest battles of our lives.